Welcome to the Fundraising Elevator, where we're all headed up. This podcast is a production of Elevate, an online learning platform for fundraising event professionals. We're coming to you today from the studios of the AV department. Please welcome our hosts, Kristen Steele and Samantha Swaim.
Well, hello and welcome to the Fundraising Elevator. We're here today in a little bit of a different studio, and we are so excited to have a special guest joining us. To kick us off, we have just a couple of announcements we wanted to make sure to start with. Make sure that you check out Elevate. It is just around the corner, and this is your last chance to register. The Elevate Conference is our 2-day hybrid fundraising event school deep dive into how to make your galas the most effective, how to make your fundraising at events the most effective, and most importantly right now, how we can gather for impact and change. So we hope that you'll check that out at swaimstrategies.com. Also, we want to announce that we, like many others, are exploring and diving into the world of Blue Sky and Substack. And we hope you'll join us there. We're at Swaim Strategies on both Substack and Blue Sky. And we're developing a bit of a community on Substack as just a resource for folks to share questions, tell us what's going on with their gala, what questions they have about their fundraising events. So we hope you will join us. But it has been a crazy start to the year, no doubt. Definitely just a week of whirlwinds, especially for our nonprofit friends. And there have been so many changes, whether it be risk to federal funding, whether it be pauses to federal funding, slashing to DEI programming, increased needs in our communities are growing. And it just feels really destabilizing at this time. And Kristen and I have been looking for the signs of hope and have been looking to the helpers. And that's where we feel a lot of hope right now, is that we know this sector, the nonprofit sector, it is so good at building community, removing barriers, and really designing for safe space and solutions. So we know that probably a lot of the answers to the struggle right now exist here in this community. But today we really wanted to ask the question of how do we start to build now for a better future? So Kristen, why don't we introduce our guest who's going to help talk to us about that?
Let's do it. Here to help us explore the question of a better future is author of The Generosity Crisis, Nathan Chappell. His book has been called a case for radical connection to solve humanity's greatest challenges in an effort to launch a return to interconnection. As a thought leader, public speaker, and writer, Nathan is one of the world's foremost experts on the intersection between artificial intelligence and philanthropy. Nathan serves as Senior Vice President of Donor Search, where he leads the AI deployments for some of the nation's largest nonprofit organizations. Nathan, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
To kick us off, I just want to be super clear that you've been on this path for a while. The Generosity Crisis was launched in 2022, and yet it seems more important now than ever. What do you think the road ahead looks like for nonprofits?
Wow, that's getting harder and harder just based on what you said. And, yeah. Someone yesterday said, I think today is the 52nd day of January, and it feels like that. I mean,
yes,
the future is getting harder to project. In fact, I was just auditing some predictions that we had made in Q4 last year around AI regulation, which have now completely been reversed. So, I think what we know for sure is that, our sector has over the last 20, 30, 40 years have moved from a very relational type of fundraising from when I started fundraising in the year 2000 to a much more transactional type of fundraising. Yeah. So I think one thing's for sure, the data actually shows this, is that if we continue on the path that we're on, essentially there'll be a continued decrease in the number of people who give, right? So not in total giving, but in the total number of people who give. In fact, the latest data just came out a few weeks ago. It's revised every 3 years. So only 45.8% of Americans give now. That's down from 49.6 in the last data set. So that's, sadly, I don't want to start with a negative of where that, what the future holds. But at the same time, I think we have agency of envisioning a different future. And actually, that's where I think the intersection of AI comes in, but also just awareness. I mean, the book did come out a few years ago, and there was a marketing push kind of around it. It was not a very popular thing to write a book called The Generosity Crisis to the most optimistic people in the world. But it's now in a phase of like organic growth I had a large DAF holder made it required reading for all of their executives a few weeks ago. And every day I was actually just at this random dinner in Florida the other day where a pastor is like, "Oh, I read your book, and oh my gosh, your way is like, how do we take these ideas of radical connection to scale?" So while the data is against us, I think the hopeful pessimist side of me, believes that if we collectively come together, we can envision a different future.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes until the data's against us, we don't really actually start listening to the things that we probably all intuitively know. Being in relationship versus being in transaction yields a better future for everybody. And we can keep saying that, but until it's like, no, actually, this is what's happening, people don't
Right.
wake up to that.
I've realized there's different types of people. And so, well, so in fact, behind me is a book that my grandfather wrote in 1972. He was a geologist, and he wrote a book on the environment. It's called Crisis by Consent. And surprisingly, and I did not think this through when we wrote the generosity crisis, that it had the same word in it. But his Crisis by Consent is this depiction that our greatest enemy is actually people not caring about anything. Like it, and he kind of goes into lots of different things, the environment being one of them. But really, that's the part that should make us the most concerned. And so I think the idea that different people distill good news and bad news differently. Some they don't want to be presented with bad news; they want to present it in a positive light, and others. And I think I came to the realization that it didn't matter with whether people liked it or hated it. That if they were thinking about it, as long as they weren't apathetic to it, as long as they weren't like just being like, it doesn't matter. That would be the worst case scenario. Like, you can hate this book and everything about it, but at least you're talking about generosity and why you hate it. And so I think for what it's worth, whether it's not the best book ever written, and we hear a lot that it's the first 100 pages are very depressing and you need to eat a box of cookies while you read it. It's, at least it level sets of like, we know what we know. Yeah. And then we can have debate on whether we agree with it or don't.
Yeah. It's interesting because I appreciate you saying the first 100 days or 100 pages is completely depressing, because I actually picked up the book 2 weeks ago to prep for our conversation after having read it when it first came out. And it was sort of startled to see that your first 100 pages were all sort of a what if scenario that we're seeing occur right now. So rather than it being depressing, it felt to me like, oh, okay, this is speaking truth to what's happening. And yet then as you continue reading, there are solutions that you present, and there are specific solutions that you offer around, like you said, radical connection and caring, and the importance of bringing people together in other ways than just around money. So I'm curious, as we see our nonprofit friends in this like spin right now, if it feels to me very much like the top of the pandemic again, where it's like, what do we do? What do we do? What do you think is the crucial thing when you are looking for solutions? What do you think the crucial thing is right now for nonprofits to focus on?
I mean, so it's such a good question. I mean, I think, and I really associate my orientation is as a fundraiser. So I spent, 20 years as an accidental fundraiser. And so it's hard for me to think of it any other way. To be honest, I think it's really about asking ourselves the tough questions and being willing to ask ourselves. So if I project my nonprofit fundraising hat back on, and if I sat down in a safe space with my team or a couple colleagues and be like, what are the practices that we are doing now that are incentivizing transaction over relationships? And that can be as simple as, well, our board report, we don't even talk about retention on our board report. Or maybe we do, but it's like number 8 on the list, but revenue and expenses is on the top. And it's just flipping that, not to say that money is not important, because that's what pays bills. It's around the orientation and what we're prioritizing, or what KPIs are we creating. And this is the thing, it's painful to hear, because after the book came out, I've been on this 2-year kind of book tour roadshow. And I hear especially leaders saying, I believe in so much of what this book talks about, but at the end of the day, I only keep my job if I fill the leaky bucket. And so, they have then created KPIs and incentives that reward transactions, not relationships. And we've also learned that a lot of them don't have the freedom to make those changes without board approval. And so I think having the tough conversations, auditing our practices, and really categorizing them, does this build relationship? And that means, like, does it add value to retention and donor lifetime value? Or does this just promote another transaction? And then how are we educating our other stakeholders that, we as an organization, we as a sector, have created some of these dynamics ourselves, and we need to imagine a different way. And so I think starting with a safe space and some of those questions and being honest, and we've just seen some really honest conversation around this. So it's super encouraging.
I feel like it's not always clear to folks the short-sightedness of transaction-based exchange, in that its value to me as the donor is minuscule, and the decision to turn off or turn on that spigot is also relatively minuscule to me in terms of its impact, whether I say yes or no. It's very different to have to provide that answer to someone I'm in relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I think sometimes we miss that as the tail of what's actually happening. And so when we're talking about prioritizing relationships, that's why we're saying that, because of the short lifespan of a transaction for everyone involved.
Yeah.
It's also crazy when you look at the math, right? I mean, we know that it costs X% or X times more to acquire a donor than it does to steward a donor. Yet, for some reason, our sector is okay with these like atrocious retention rates. Where average newly acquired donors retain at like 19 to 21% on a good day. Total donors usually retain somewhere around like maybe 60% if we're lucky in total. And the reality is that in the private sector, that would never happen, right? CEOs, boards get fired, everybody gets fired if that happens. And it really goes back to, this came out of one of our conversations after the book was written. Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's business partner, had this quote, and it literally is like the most simple business quote of all business quotes, which is, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. We've created incentives, meaning KPIs and metrics and things like that, that literally dictate, essentially reward people for just doing more, not better. And so the freedom in all of this, and what, some of the epiphanies that have come to us through like workshops and having this conversation, it's like, wow, this reminds me of how fundraising was when I first got started. Like, I already know what to do. I know what I want to receive as being, aligned with an organization, the feelings that I want to have. But our practices haven't rewarded that. And so create incentives. If you want more relationships, you'll create incentives that reward relationships. And if you want more transactions, then you'll have more transactions. So it's really, we have agency within our organizations to determine what the future looks like. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. Sometimes that does require having difficult conversations with boards. Sometimes it has to do with reimagining a new type of event that really just goes deep to the next level, not just to a passive relationship, but to a deeper relationship.
Yeah.
You ask the question in the book, what if everybody stops giving and confronts the crisis of our structures and needs head on? How do you think the crisis has evolved since you wrote the book, and where you think we are now in relationship to that?
Yeah, I mean, the book starts out, for those that haven't read it, starts out a bit dystopian, right? And it was kind of this idea of like, somebody goes to the hospital to have their baby and it's closed. And it's funny because I wanted it to be even more dystopian. Like if I had my way, I'd just like, let's just scare the crap out of everyone, because it's like, I'm more on the side of like, if I know that's at stake, then I'm more willing to make change, substantive change. I will say though, since the book came out, which was not a popular thing, like there was some grief that I was, pushed upon or into by, I don't name consulting firms and other like longstanding citizens of the philanthropic community that tended to promote just all the positive things, but don't look over here at what's going on. Just look at the total dollars. And it was kind of an unpopular thing to talk about, to be honest, in 2.5 years ago when the book came out. And I had to persevere. I just had to like turn off the blinders, be like, who cares what the naysayers say? As long as people are, debating the merits of generosity, it's all good. What I've seen change is a far more acceptance of having the difficult conversations. And I think the book probably came at a time where the Generosity Commission also came out around the same time. In fact, after we sent our manuscript in, they came up with a statement that said the future of generosity in America is not guaranteed. That's like a powerful statement. Like, as a citizen of the world of like, what does that future look like? A far less generous future. And so I've seen in my 20 years of fundraising plus, I've seen more honest conversation about what's working and what's not working. What have we done to ourselves versus what's been done to us? And the realization that the layer on top of that is that nonprofits are no longer in the business of raising money. They're in the business of building connection. And that's been a really healthy awakening, because if we're just going to compete for discretionary dollars, that's like, the scarcity mindset amplified. Like we're just like a race to the bottom. But if we acknowledge that people have many other ways of expressing generosity through B corporations or GoFundMe or whatever it is, then we have to ask ourselves a question: are we an amplifier of generosity, or are we a barrier to it? And I think when we are willing to have those conversations, in the last 3 years, and I'm, biased in this because I'm at the center of a lot of these conversations, but I organically, even when people come, it's like, I read your book and we had talked about this and this, with our team. And so that's super encouraging. I think you always have to ask yourself the question, like, is the pain great enough to enact change? And I think the book came at a time where the pain was getting great enough that change is inevitable. Like change is going to have to happen. Otherwise, we're all, envisioning a future that we don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, it's interesting to think too about I think 2 years ago, a lot of people were kind of in that, how do we recover from all the changes that have been put upon us? So the idea of continuing the hard conversations is, challenging, but I think we've been confronted right now with the fact that we're up against systems that aren't working. We're working within, organizations that have, like you said, like incentives to do less or to not perform as well as we can. And I think we're kind of in this place where all the chips are on the table now, in the opportunity to rebuild, rethink, develop, with our mission and vision still at the center of it, but really analyze our actions and what we do and how we do it. And yet I think we wield a lot of power in the nonprofit sector. I mean, the fact that we're an incredibly large industry, we kind of bounce back and forth right now between being the third and the fourth largest employee trade in the country, that I think we have a lot of potential to really have these hard conversations as leadership teams, as board teams, and rethink how and what we evolve out of this into. You have lived very much in the tech world since leaving the fundraising world, and tech world, AI world for nonprofits. We've lived over kind of like in a separate silo from you in the event world, and oftentimes you're the first to say, like, is this event really helping you? We would agree with you and say, it's not always the best mode of fundraising or the best activity that you can do to increase revenue. And yet I think what we're experiencing, both just in the increase of technology with the sort of isolation that started to occur with the pandemic, is that we're seeing this real need for community to be together. And to your point, organizations that are thinking differently about how to build community and how to do that towards solutions, and your sort of radical connection, are finding a stronger path forward. And so I'm curious about kind of what you see as solutions to the crisis at hand. And can you talk about the idea of radical connection?
Yeah, I mean, and I think events are so interesting right now. Whereas, I ran events within the organization. So I was at UCSD and City of Hope, and we did, City of Hope, we did 200 events a year, and so many of them became so routine, right? They weren't really focused on deepening an experience. They were just more checking a box. I believe that we're at a stage in society in general where we're longing for connection.
Yeah.
And as we live in this extremely transactional world, the average person interacts with around 5,000 algorithms per day right now. So every time you're swiping on your phone, 300 feet a day on your phone, it's an algorithm pointed at your brain, trying to essentially erase to this bottom of the brainstem idea. And events is where like all that just goes away. Like you're using all of your other sensory, capabilities, and you're like, okay, I'm not scrolling. I'm like in here, and it feels very different. I think there's this resurgence of things that are personal. I mean, I just shared before we got on here, like I moved from California to Tennessee in large part because I wanted a deeper sense of community, of people that I could surround myself with, that I could actually have conversation with and look in the eye. And so I think there is a sense of that. And we see that also in studies of younger generations that are looking, maybe they don't understand the impact or the need for a 501c3 organization, like the tax status. They want to make an impact, but they want to feel connected. And fortunately, nonprofits have this inherent ability not to pretend they're the community, but to actually be the community.
Yeah.
And, I think about City of Hope. City of Hope was, and we shared the story in the book where, I was talking to one of our favorite donors who had at this point given tens of millions of dollars, who said, how they met as a couple. They met as a couple when City of Hope back in like the 50s had opened their door and they were doing potlucks and dances. It was just like a Friday night thing, potlucks and dances. And they'd come in and they actually met each other, got married. And then they, fast forward, they've raised their kids and their grandkids in this sense of like, this is a charity that we support. That meant a lot. But I also know that when I started at City of Hope, they were on this 10-year path of divesting from all of that. They were trying to do away with all the guilds, or trying to do away with all the ancillary boards because they were not efficient and they were, they were cumbersome. And so now we're seeing this, like, I think we'll see a total reversal of that, of like, how do the nonprofits actually open their door? How do they, really build these like deep experiences that aren't transactional? And that's really the idea of radical connection. I mean, it was nothing magical. It was, and in the book, there's this framework for radical connection, which really is this like true test of, are your practices, on one side, the total transactional of just like, I would only give to you if it was like super convenient or someone strong armed me or whatever. Like, I don't really care about you. It's like fully transactional. I have some sort of affiliation. I know who you are, versus I'm going to go out of my way for you. And really, how this manifests itself is like when someone asks me about, like, say, the Farmling project or my alma mater, it's like my heart beats a little bit faster. I smile a little bit, and someone's like, I just made a donation to the Farmling project. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're just so amazing. It's the thing that you brag about versus the thing that you just mildly care if it's convenient for you. And that served as a really good template for organizations to have honest conversation about. Like, if you want to know, which many don't, if you want to know, like, sit down with a donor and be like, on this list of these 10 things, like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? It literally is a donor survey. I think we have to be willing to hear the hard things, but if we want to envision a different future, it's like, look, donors will give you the pathway to their heart if you ask them. And if you're willing to make change, and if you're like, look, do you mildly care about us, or do you brag about us to all your friends? And that's really important, because at least if then we can have a roadmap to be like, how do we get there? And, when I see events in that idea of radical connection from a data, I'll tie this back to AI. Actually, one of our earlier AI projects, we found that if someone had attended an event 3 times, that actually there was no more incremental value in them being a major donor after that, because after 3 times they were locked. Like, the AI learned that once someone attended an event 3 times, that they had learned what they needed to learn, and they were going to continue to give. And so they were just like locked in. So there's the learning lesson was like, okay, how do you get more people to get to that 3rd event?
Yep.
Right? Because they've like, at the first one, they probably went as a guest of someone and blah, blah, I don't really know. The second one, they're like, oh yeah, that was actually a pretty good experience. Maybe I'll do it again. Third one is like, I went there by choice and I'm locked in. And so that doesn't mean you forget about those people and just like set it and forget it. But it does mean that if you're looking for the lowest hanging opportunity, find the people that have been to, 1 or 2 and really pour into their experiences, because it's amazing when you look at it from a data science perspective that, and I know this because like we attend events ourselves, and it's like, I take the time for the ones that I actually align with and associate with.
Right.
And it becomes a joy, not a burden.
Well, you tapped into 2 things that we're witnessing as well. We frequently find that in the event cycle, I love that AI is affirming this for us, in the event cycle, that when a new event is created, it's about 3 years of growth before it reaches kind of its maximum potential. And then there's a plateau moment. And in that plateau, it's an opportunity for basically diving a little bit deeper into your data to do an assessment of where are the opportunities, do a couple little adjustments, and then you can see that growth again. So that 3-year mark is something we've noted as well, and the transactional giving. That's been a trend that has been on the decline for 5 years at least. Of auctions have been going away, specifically the big like silent auctions that take so much time of the staff. People are not as interested in the stuff. They're much more interested in the people, the connections, the relationship. And when we do sell something, when it's not just a direct donation, but we're selling something at events now, most often the like high selling items are experiences to be together again.
Right.
The
Right.
opportunity
That's so
for,
interesting, right? Yeah.
10 of us are going to go to the winery with the executive director,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So it's been an interesting transition to sort of like really try to get committee members to see things from the eye of themselves as a donor, not from the eye of themselves as the doer. And slowly you can see that shift where they're like, yeah, I don't really want to buy that stuff either. So I appreciate the term of radical connection, because I think we use the term a lot, radical connection and radical hospitality,
Right.
as ways to really like bring people into space together and connect them deeply to your mission, and not simply sort of check the boxes, like you said.
And it's not expensive stuff either, right? So when you say, Unreasonable Hospitality, the book by Will,
Yeah.
I don't know how to
Will
pronounce his name.
Gadara, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, there it is. It's a fantastic book, and the parallels are just astounding, right? And
Yeah.
it's not about the expensive thing. It's about the thoughtful thing. It's about showing up and listening, and then being willing to do something with that, right? You can listen
Right.
all day long and not do anything, but like some of his best examples are like, the people coming to the Michelin rated restaurant that never got a New York hot dog, and he sends someone out to get the hot dog, and they cut it up and put it on a plate, and so that's the idea of radical connection. And anyone who's been in fundraising can tell you stories of like, oh my gosh, the thing that stands out for me is how this donor talked about how we made them feel, and how that this donor experience was something that it's the first time he had ever experienced, and so again, that requires the willingness to actually like hear some of the hard things as well.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to, I think donors will give you the key to their heart, right? And what you choose to do with that is up to you.
Yeah. Well, and just because we don't ask them doesn't mean they aren't feeling or thinking it.
Right.
We just haven't asked them to share it with us. It's
Exactly.
still happening.
Well, you touched on AI a minute ago, and when we come back, I want to make sure that we dive further into that. But we're going to take a short break to be able to hear from our partners, and we'll be right back.
Unleash the power of events to energize your donors and amplify your mission. Join us at the Elevate Conference in 2025, where you'll learn the essential tools for planning a successful fundraising event. Book your tickets now for March 12th and 13th. This dynamic hybrid conference, hosted at Avenue in Portland, Oregon, and streamed live for our virtual audience, will equip you with practical tools, demos, and templates that you can put to work immediately. Don't miss out. Secure your spot today at Elevate 2025. Visit elevatenonprofit.com to register now. Elevate Conference 2025 is brought to you by Swim Strategies and the AV Department, powered by elevatenonprofit.com.
Welcome back. We are here with Nathan Chappell talking about generosity and community building and all these amazing things. Nathan, how do you see AI helping us shape connection?
Yeah, this is the part where I get really, really excited. Also, probably pretty nerdy. I mean, it's such an interesting intersection, right? And you think about the intersection of generosity and AI. Back in 2017, I started working in machine learning, and it was the idea that I was at City of Hope, and we had 2 million patient visits a year, and we knew about 2% of patients made a gift, and we were like, well, can AI tell us the correlation between the 2% that made gifts and the 98% that didn't? And that's an area of AI called predictive AI, and actually got really, really good. It proved right away that wealth was actually not a very good determinant of altruism and generosity. Yet when we audited our practices, they were almost all based on finding wealthy people and convincing them to give, or manipulating them to give, whatever you want to say. And so that was the early days. So if like the lowest hanging fruit at the intersection of AI and generosity is this idea that it doesn't matter how much you ask for, when you ask, or what way you ask, if you're not asking the right person to begin with. And that's something that honestly is, for 2,300 years, like Aristotle literally is quoted by saying, the idea of giving money is easy, but how much to ask for and when to ask and for what purpose and or how to give it is really hard. And so, I fast forward 2,300 years, we are the first time in history, like, I don't think people understand the gravity. The first time in history, we can actually answer questions that have been unanswerable. And so we have this like two-sided coin of AI. So the prediction side is basically like who, and that's just taking all of the data and also recognizing one of our big AI epiphanies early on was one, we found that there are correlations between givers and non-givers. Not surprisingly, givers had more meaningful experiences. They had deeper experiences. So in a hospital, they were seen more frequently by certain departments that tended to have like a really high output of like high quality touch points. And so, quantity actually mattered of those experiences a lot in higher ed and other sectors, the same thing. So one side of the coin is getting really efficient at understanding who, but then that doesn't do anything on its own, right? So, for many years, we're kind of left with like, okay, now we have the answer for who, but how do we activate that who at scale? And so here, enter, generative AI. So November 30th, 2022, ChatGPT comes out and basically democratizes all generative AI for the world, almost, free or nearly free. And so now we've got two sides of the same coin. One side is about the distillation of less, like finding who like specifically should we, are most likely to like align with us. And then the other side was about more. It's like, how do we activate those people by creating something new and customizing an approach or things like that? And so we started calling this back in like 2018 precision philanthropy, and this idea that there's no such thing as a cohort of donors and non-donors or good donors or bad donors or good prospects or bad prospects, that every person is an N of one. Like you're one person, and that my degree of affiliation to you today is actually different than it's going to be in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. Like I'm constantly in my head, even organizations that I associate with, my affinity toward Farmling Project is very different than it was 6 months ago and 2 years ago, and it will be different in 6 months and 2 years based on all the variety of factors that related to me and relate to them as well. And so I'm really bullish on this idea of precision philanthropy, that we can actually take, with precision, the idea of who, and then we can use generative AI in insanely powerful ways. The worst AI you'll ever use is today. I mean, AI is like, we're in a teenage years right now where it's like moody and irritable but full of potential. And this idea that, we can now create experiences, truly like custom experiences, demonstrated through art or audio or video or a letter. And we can do this essentially at scale. And again, this goes back to this idea. We're not in the business of raising money. We're in the business of building connection. So what are all the innovative, creative ways that you can do that to foster connection, essentially with precision? That's where I get really optimistic. That's why, honestly, like the hopeful pessimist side of me is like, look, generosity crisis is completely solvable. AI is the only scalable solution to doing that. But if you can curate individual experiences based on a person's unique persona and their own data, now we're cooking with gas, and things are gonna get really exciting.
I want to nerd out a little bit more on this topic with you because I think that I tend to live in a little bit more of a Luddite world where I think of AI as being a risk, the dangers of AI. And yet, for those who are not watching, Nathan is wearing AI for Good as a hat. And we just saw you speaking at Transform about AI in the nonprofit sector and all of the resource. Can you speak to, just as folks are trying to figure out how to weather the storm and not just like get through crisis, but actually grow stronger and rethink and design new systems and new analytics, where would you start? Like, what tools would you recommend? How are people best using AI? Or do we just lean on our software partners really to figure out the best way to mobilize around AI?
Yeah, probably not the software partners. The place to start. So the thing that worries me the most about AI is people use it without a plan, right? And so it's just like, I have FOMO or just even worse, like I have to do something different. I'm just going to dive in and not really question things. that scares me more than an organization that pauses for a few minutes and says, okay, what problem are we trying to solve? What are the appropriate tools to solve that problem? And what is our ethos and our values around using AI? And so the place you start is by creating a framework. And most organizations have some sort of like digital or data governance policy. They don't, they should, like they don't, publish credit cards on the internet and things like that, hopefully. Let's just hope they
Yeah,
don't.
let's go with that.
Is to modify that to include AI and what that needs to look like. And there's lots of open source documents, including fundraising.ai has a framework for responsible AI that's free, and lots of orgs have just taken it and plagiarized off of it and made it their own, and that's awesome. That's what it's for, is to say, okay, this is our framework around using AI, and therefore we're going to ask ourselves a question every time: does this AI, the solution, promote and protect trust? And if it does not, it's a very easy answer. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. If we can't sit around a room and be like, there's some significant unintended consequences or significant things that, this is, if we keep on doing this, is going to make giving more transactional, we should not do it. But if we can honestly say, this tool, vendor or built on our own, can promote and protect trust, then, give it a whirl and make sure that it complies with all of your technical standards. So start there and then apply the right, type of technology. The coolest thing about especially generative AI is that the most, we always say like innovation follows need, and the organizations that have the greatest need, and honestly, those that have the greatest advantage right now, are the smallest and most nimble, that aren't bureaucratic. I mean, I know too many big organizations that started an AI committee a year ago that haven't made a single decision because they can't agree on anything. Like, are we going to use Copilot or ChatGPT? By the way, they're owned by the same company basically, and they're the exact same model. And so, the smaller, nimble, organizations that are willing to, incentivize curiosity and reward curiosity are going to be the winners. And those that don't, and no matter what size, if they're not willing to be curious and ask questions and try new things, then, unfortunately, the market you will be obsolete over a certain time. It'd be like an organization refusing to use the internet. Like, how many of those organizations around? Like, not many, I hope.
Well, for those small organizations that have the capacity to be more nimble and to take on some new things, do you think there's going to be an explosion of resources out there in the way of like specific niche, nonprofit AI consultants and folks that are coming in to help nonprofits navigate this landscape?
I'd imagine there has to be, but we haven't seen it yet. And I don't know. There's a million consultants that will talk about how to use generative AI. And that's like how to extract the most out of writing a prompt and things like that. And those are valuable, but they're not going to transform your business. They're not going to deal with like, how do you build a curious culture? And, I mean, truly, there will be winners and losers in the AI race. And those that are curious, I firmly believe, will outpace those that are not. And that's not something that you have to, you have to be taught in a way. Like, you can be, you can build a culture around that, but it's a discipline, right? It's like when employees come to you with new ideas, you're like, oh, this person's so annoying. Like, that's just me as a child. Like, literally my entire like youth was just like, are you joking? Like, don't ask me a million questions about things. And so we have to learn to like reverse that and reward curiosity, because we have a tool that essentially can do almost anything now. And to really get to a point where we're like truly innovating ways to become more efficient, to build connection at scale. And I think that's really exciting. So of course, there'll be consultants that will come on the scene to do some of that. But I think it's beyond just how to use ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini. It's about what are you trying to achieve in the long term? How does predictive and generative go together? What is essentially your AI readiness plan and your roadmap to achieving success? The orgs that are doing that are going to, make out. On the private side, by the way, this is already big business. I mean, McKinsey predicts this to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry on the consulting side, essentially guiding organizations through their AI transformation. Our sector will get there, but, there's always that thing of like, how many years behind are we? And so it will present itself. It just, a little bit premature. We're starting to see some signs of it. That proactive, like, AI now, but it's very, it's basically the earliest adopters right now.
I think some of the lag in our sector too comes access to technology is
Sure.
one, but also I think there's a baked in story about polarization around it, and like, no, absolutely not, until we start to chip away at that and go, oh well, maybe, like that knee jerk moment. What could reasonable caution around
Yeah.
tech in our sector look like, so that we can speak to some of those outliers who just are like, la la la, I'm not listening,
Right.
I can't deal with it. Like, how can we say, I see that, I hear that, and also,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of schools of thought on this. I mean, one is the complete outlier that is completely resistant to essentially change will not survive.
right,
I mean, in the reality with AI is not considered a static technology; it's considered an exponential technology. Exponentials are very powerful things that AI is not programmed by, a bunch of kids and wearing hoodies in Silicon Valley. AI is training AI, and it's not one AI; it's like thousands of AIs training an AI, and so those that do will outpace those that don't. And that is going to be a reckoning that will happen in the next few years. And that goes on the individual level. The people who embrace AI will outpace those that don't. They'll be more creative. They'll be more strategic. Their output will be better. They'll also be happier because they did their work better and faster than others that didn't. So that will take care of itself. But actually, I think the lack of financial incentives to scale are actually what are also a nonprofit superpower. I started writing an article on this morning, so stay tuned for it here pretty soon. But the private sector must promote scale over safety. Must, right? The financial market will not reward them. Right now, for every 1,000 papers written on AI, so like advances in AI, every 1,000 papers, only one paper is written on safety. And so they have financial incentives that mandate that that's what they do, right? Because if they're not, they're less efficient. They're going to lose the arms race, all those things. I actually really believe that the nonprofit sector, their lack of financial incentives is actually the clarity that the world needs. The clarity the world needs is like, just because we can do something doesn't mean it's helpful. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so I think what many people appear as think of the nonprofit sector as a weakness of this, like, oh, you don't have financial incentives, so you're less efficient and you're like slow, actually has now become this really profound superpower that the world needs more than ever, especially in a world of deregulation. So if the government's not going to regulate, which they have their own reasons for doing that, right or wrong, the reality is that it's then incumbent upon the nonprofit sector to be the adult in the room, to be the voice of being like, okay, just because we can do these things, and those things can be very helpful in the short term, but they have many unintended consequences. And it's not, impossible to see those. I mean, what if we intervened, on the environmental side, 20, 30 years ago in a really big way, or social media and regulated social media. So we didn't see increases in, anxiety and depression and teen suicide and decreases in happiness. So the sector has the ability and the clarity of view to see those things, but also without the financial incentives that are going to make sure that we're just like keeping up with the Joneses, that we can be this really annoying voice in the world to be like, hey, yes, but here's a better way. And the private sector won't follow it, but at least the nonprofit sector won't destroy itself in the process, right? And so I'm really, really hopeful there's some really key players out there that are willing to amplify this sentiment of essentially what I consider like an accord for responsible or trustworthy and beneficial AI. And so I think that will come probably as a response of the deregulation.
Interesting. You mentioned in sort of previous iterations of conversations around the generosity crisis that you're starting to see some movement of this innovation. And then you just said that you're really hopeful about some of the sort of future thought leadership around it. So I'm curious to understand, is there anyone out there that's doing something really amazing that you would hold up as an example?
As an individual use case of just AI?
Yeah, or just like understanding how it can really impact mission and vision and be used in a really proactive way.
I mean, one I use way too often, but it's just so good, is the Furniture Bank in Toronto, and Dan Kershaw. It's just this like quintessential story. I don't know if you've ever been on their website or have met him, but it's like a 4-person fundraising shop. And to be honest, he would not say he's most creative. He would not say he's most strategic. He's not a technologist, but he's super curious. And so he at Furniture Bank has amplified their voice to like an exponential degree. Like they're just like, by all intents and purposes, I mean, this would be me and the Boys and Girls Club, should never be known at a national or international level, right? It was just not going to happen. Yet he is, right? Because he created an AI manifesto of what he believes and how to use AI. He found a way of very transparently, essentially using poverty porn, which is, this idea of like, let's have pictures of poor children sleeping on the floor, by putting a huge disclaimer in the middle of it that says this image is not real, but the reality is. And so he's just found ways to use AI in super ethical and transparent ways. And to the point where it's amplified him onto a national, international stage. I mean, truly international stage at this point. And now bringing in gifts from IKEA. I don't know if it's public. IKEA just, is giving him gifts. And so there's lots of those. There's actually lots of those stories that are coming from like these kind of, the little nonprofit that could kind of story, but they all have one thing in common, is that they realized they wouldn't get anywhere if they didn't ask questions. And so I think that curiosity is something I write about a lot and talk about a lot to an annoying level. It's, I think, the last, human thing that will never be replicated by AI. And we know this because if someone is told to be curious, are you actually being curious or just being told? An AI cannot be curious on its own. So I think we own this moral high ground of being curious, and that just means we've got the world at our at availability right now to do things. And if we're just willing to ask the question, what if, a lot, we're just going to do amazing things. And that's, hopefully, and we're pointing this to the good actors, because the same technology can be used by bad actors and do lots of harm. Fortunately, we surround ourselves with people that wake up every day with this, burden to do well and to leave the world a better place.
Ask what if a lot. That should be a t-shirt, I think.
That's
A
true.
little reminder for it.
It feels so natural to me because literally I was raised by a single mom, and she was uneducated. She my grandfather was a PhD, but it skipped a generation. And so my mom, but was smart enough to say, hey, there's this guy named Bob up the street, and Bob was an engineer, and Bob just seemed to know everything about everything. And so she would send me like 5 houses up the street all the time. I mean, like, what if this? Like, it was like the weirdest things. Like, why did my hands like get pruned when I, take a bath? And she was like, go ask Bob. And so now we have Bob on our computer and our phone, so we can ask the question, what if, all the time. There's like almost, it knows something about everything. And that means like, if you point it to the right direction, like there's, its imagination is your limit.
I think part of the piece in this is permission sometimes too, and or what cultivated leadership around these pieces are. And so I'm wondering what you think of in terms of type of leadership needed for nonprofits to weather the tightrope of this time and all of this possibility. I'm thinking, I'm thinking of our listener who's sitting here going, cool, interesting, maybe I could be curious. And also the last 12 ideas I've had have been no's, or better, a leader who's like, sure, I want to imbue this curiosity in my organization, but what does that look like? How do I do that?
Yeah.
How can I make a space?
Well, it's such a good question. Everything lives and dies by leadership, right? And so, and we see both. So I see like Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Monica is this chief development officer. She's not a technologist, but she's curious, and she'll let people try and experiment new things, and essentially created like this research and philanthropic research and development budget to like, you can try stuff, and knowing that an R&D budget sometimes is risky and will fail. But I've also seen the other, to your point, like I've seen like physical cases of people saying, I'm working at this organization, I have all these ideas. Every time I present those ideas, it's no. Actually leave the organization to go specifically to an organization that's using AI. And so one was someone that I've known for a really long time, and we happened to be working with this one higher ed institution, but not another one. She actually left her organization to go to the one that was using AI because as a fundraiser, she felt like she could be more successful. So she walked with her feet. The third example is the fundraiser who is not that leader, but is saying, I want to learn as much as I can to like, how do I amplify my work? And so there's a person who basically, he just became super curious. He kept on calling and be like, why does it work? And how does it work? And like, how do I know if I can trust it? And just asked all the questions. All of a sudden he started closing more gifts faster at a higher average dollar than any of his peers. He ends up going to become basically the VP or the CDO at another organization, essentially leapfrogging like 3 or 4 levels. And so you see the market will take care of this on its own, but the people, you have agency over that, right? If you're working for a leader that is not rewarding curiosity, you can go. And, or you could just learn everything you can and then boost your way out of that. And that's the thing, and probably one of the things that concerns me about the sector is like, leaders that are afraid to ask the questions, because the leaders, they feel like they're under a spotlight and they need to know the answers. So we need to create safe spaces for them to ask all those questions and not be embarrassed, because it's kind of like, it's not going to help just putting your head in the sand and being like, oh, this is going to be for another person to deal with. So I think we'll see a kind of a combination of all those things in the next few years, but probably an amplification and acceleration of those things, to be honest.
Which we have an interesting opportunity here in that from the user side, it seems like we literally just turned on a switch for everyone.
Right.
And I know it's been baking in the background and been happening, but all of a sudden my ability to utilize it, I feel like we're in really great company. So it seems like a great time to have that curiosity at the forefront for leadership, to bring everybody into a room and acknowledge, none of us know. I have no idea. Let's go find out. What does that look like?
Yeah, what was is not what will be. And, not too many people understand the power of exponentials. I mean, I worked in a cancer hospital, and the way cancer spreads essentially is exponential. So 1 cell becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, like very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. If you take a piece of paper and you fold it in half, and then you fold it in half, and you fold it in half, what happens when you fold that same paper 42 times? That paper will reach from Earth to the moon. 42 times is all it takes. 42 folds of that same paper on top of itself would reach from Earth to the moon. So we're talking about technology, to your point, everyone's in the same boat. Like the switch just turned on. It just turned on for like a nanosecond ago. No one has this figured out. Anyone who says they do is lying. And so, this is where it gets super helpful to just be honest and be curious. And as long as it's grounded in the principles of, promoting and protecting trust, then I think we're going to be able to do amazing things.
Yeah. When someone comes to us and says, we don't know where to start with our event and we're looking for advice about what type of event to build, we frequently are turning to their data. That's the first place that I look, is your data tells a story. If someone's looking to dive into AI and open this conversation with their team around, hey, let's be curious and explore it together, are there data points that they can start to use to help them figure out where to begin and where to leverage AI most?
Well, there's all types of data. So, I mean, the types of data that tell the story of how many people give a crap, really is represented in essentially the velocity of giving. So AI is really good at understanding the correlation between people that give and they give more over a shorter period of time versus a longer period of time. So it's called time series. And so it understands the velocity of engagement. We actually don't use wealth data in any of our models, so we're using other types of data. So it could be email open rates, it can be survey data. And if you're an organization that has not a lot of data, one of the best, insanely powerful ways to curate data is to do donor surveys and make them short. Make sure that you report out on what you find so that they feel like there's this feedback loop. But generative AI is insanely good at understanding personas. And so before, you used to do a donor survey, you'd hire a company, and it was like witchcraft. It was like, okay, I'm going to pay all this money, and I don't really know, and they're going to tell me like, I've got, Sally Says and Bobby Know Who, whatever it is, and these stupid personas that literally do nothing with. And it's just like this giant waste. Well, any organization could do that now at scale and repeatedly. And so like curating your own data and then building these personas, or like what's the most common sentiment and what's the most obvious thing that was missed, and then what can we do to, build strategy around this certain persona. So that's again like this new, democratized superpower that nonprofits have at their disposal. I mean, I get so excited about the opportunity. I just look at it and it's just like so hard because I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody, like, do you know what you have? Like, let's do this thing and let's curate, individual experiences for people that transcend a transaction. I mean, Carvana did this over a year ago where they had, my son had a car that he bought at Carvana. He was one of them, but they output a million videos that were custom to them. So they had generative AI write the story of like, do you remember the day that you picked me up in April? And, since then we've been on these journeys, and they had this, a video curated in generative, all automated. So generative created this little video, and it was in a impressionistic painting style because raw, and it can't do this like a photorealistic way. And it's like, holy moly, that's like, it literally draws this thing of like, actually, our Carvana experience wasn't great, but this is like really interesting. It was telling the story from the persona of the car. So they like, kind of anthropomorphize the car.
Uh-huh.
I mean, so think about like that opportunity. And they're Carvana, and they have lots of money, or maybe, I think who knows, they'll be out of business soon. I don't know. But where nonprofits have the ability at scale to curate individual experiences, both online and offline, and truly the combination of those two things, right? Like that's crazy. That's like so inspiring.
I appreciate your optimism because I think that the headlines right now are screaming crisis at every turn about everything.
Right.
And there's a lot of trauma happening around our missions, right? The people we serve, the communities we serve, that I love that something that could feel really overwhelming, you bring to the table as an offering of resource and excitement and enthusiasm. And so I appreciate your passion, because I think that it is a whole new opportunity that if folks lean into that opportunity, there's a real sort of chance that we could see bigger impact on our missions.
We have to, right? The stakes are higher than ever, right? We cannot settle for a less generous future. And the data is against us, and the headwinds are against us, and we have to reimagine what that looks like. But we're also at the same time presented with a new frontier that can solve questions that were unsolvable. And so I have a new book coming out. I don't know if you even knew this, coming out May 6th, called Nonprofit AI. And it's not just about fundraising. It's like all the ways that nonprofits can use it. Kind of brings in the need for change, through the generosity crisis, but how to do this in a way to embed AI into all the things that you're doing in a trustworthy and beneficial way. And so it's on pre-order on Amazon now, but all to say is that, and tons of use cases and case studies of organizations that have already done this.
I love it. Everyone needs to go pre-order Nonprofit AI. So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're just going to ask you to step into the fundraising elevator and give some advice to our listeners. And we'll make sure that we take some good notes about links and resources we can share out to folks as they're ruminating about AI. We'll be right back. We've been partnering with Greater Giving for over 20 years as our go-to event auction software. Greater Giving allows us to do our job planning fundraising events even better because we can manage guest lists, seating, bid number assignments, and sales all in one place.
That makes it great for our nonprofit partners and their guests. Check out Greater Giving for your next event at greatergiving.com. Link in the show notes. Welcome back. We are here with Nathan Chappell. We're going to ask him to join us in the fundraising elevator where we're all headed up. Nathan, what is a bit of wisdom or tip or resource specifically that you'd share for nonprofits right now to keep them heading up?
Other than, the generosity crisis, I think, and honestly, I think it's around, the tip is to sit around and really ask yourself what's not working, and being willing to, I think, ask two simple questions, like, what happens if we don't change? And most organizations know in their heart, like, what that looks like. What happens if we don't change? They're either looking at a declining donor count, or they're looking at, really poor retention rates. And then the second question is, what would it take to change? And so, that's like $50,000 of consulting I just saved you. So, what happens if we don't change? What would it take to change? And if you're willing to do that and have that honest conversation, I think you're going to be light years ahead of other organizations that are just putting their head in the sand.
That's fantastic.
You make me very excited about the potential and the possibility of what's ahead. I appreciate your heart-centered leadership too, as we're talking about things like technology. I think that you have led us down a path of understanding technology from a really solution and heart-centered way. So thank you. Thank you for Generosity Crisis. I'm so excited about Nonprofit AI, and we'll make sure that we share that out to folks so people pre-order. If you had a magic wand, what would you want to make sure you leave folks with?
And it's probably just what I'm stuck on right now. It's to ask the question, what if? So in this age of AI, I think curiosity trumps all. And I think that's something inherently we know what to do. And sometimes that's suppressed or repressed because, our childhood, we were told not to ask questions.
Yes.
Or cultures that don't empower questions. But if I had a magic wand, I would encourage everyone to just, understand that what was is not what will be. To your point, like a spigot turned on, the world is fundamentally different than it was 2 years ago.
Yep.
I don't think most people even understand the gravity of what that means, but it's fundamentally different. And curiosity wins in this next era.
I love it. Thank you for your inspiration and wisdom as everyone's sort of trying to navigate this new world. And thanks for providing tools and being on the forefront in that so that we can all start to ask those questions and ask what if more often. Nathan, thank you for being here and joining us in the Fundraising Elevator today.
Such an honor. Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Fundraising Elevator is produced in partnership with Swaim Strategies at the studios of the AV department. The program is produced and directed by Steve Osborne, with audio engineering and original music by Dwayne Anderson, Heidi Christensen, and Adam Breeden. Video production by Shannon Doran. Graphic design by Pendulum Creative Group. Marketing by Lisa Aragon. Support from Mary Elizabeth, Todd Campbell, John Lyles, and Andy Dowsett. And voiceover by Josh Boykin.
Hey y'all, it's Kristen. Before we leave, I want to ask for your help to make the podcast grow. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please like, follow, and subscribe to the Fundraising Elevator. And if you're getting a lot out of the show, share it with a friend. Leave us a review. These things help make sure that the podcast continues heading up. Thanks so much for being here and tuning in.
Event planners are discovering Avenue, the Pacific Northwest's new AV-forward event venue, intentionally designed with nonprofit fundraising events in mind. From the 93-foot video production wall to the highest quality sound and lighting, premier AV features are included in every venue rental. You'll find the space and audiovisual enhancements to create your unique and memorable event. Visit avenueportland.com to schedule your personal tour.